On the 21st of November 1916, His Majesty's hospital ship the Bratanic sank in the Aegean Sea following a collision with a mine. While this wasn't considered a war crime, the White Star Line vessel became an innocent victim of a great war. The Britannic's story was a tragic but unknown one, and over a century later, some parts aren't known or have been told. In this documentary, we will be diving deeper into the untold story of the HMHS Britannic, in the words of the people who were there. After an overnight crossing from Belfast, Bratanic, under the command of Captain Joseph Ranson, finally arrived at Liverpool's Gladstone dock early on the morning of 12th of December to complete the fitting out and to take on the medical staff and supplies, being officially commissioned as a hospital ship that same day. 2 days later, Captain Charles Bartlett arrived from Scotland to assume the command, and with his arrival, the command structure was all but complete. Captain Bartlett was well known by his peers for being a strict disciplinarian, cautious seamanship, and an ability to detect ice by smell, earning him the nickname Iceberg Charlie. Bartlett had many years of experience with the White Star Line as both a captain and the line's marine superintendent at Liverpool. Bartlett had a connection to the Britannic's older sister ship, the RMS Titanic, where he would enlist the crew members prior to the maiden voyage. He had also participated in the British inquiry into the disaster, and now he would take charge of the biggest Olympian of all, and he would maintain a relationship with the Britannic for the rest of his life. Also boarding the Britannic at Liverpool was a man by the name of Dr. Harold Goodman. Dr. Harold Goodman was assigned to the Britannic to perform surgical procedures during its crossings, and he boarded the ship in Liverpool, and although he had no prior experience with military life, he joined the ship. Upon the arrival of Bartlett and Goodman in the ship's commission as a hospital ship, the Britannic docked in the Mersey at 11 o'clock to complete the fitting out and to take on additional medical staff and supplies. However, the ship's anchor remained strangely immobile, and 200 RAMC orderlies had not yet arrived from Aldershot and were not expected to be on board for another 12 hours. To pass the time, Goodman settled in cabin 51, a two-berth stateroom that he was to share with Lieutenant Anderson, and spent the rest of the day exploring the ship. As the missing orderlies would not arrive until midnight, Goodman's time inspecting the colossal vessel proved to be well spent. However, 20 minutes later, the order was given to raise the anchor, and the fully illuminated Bratanic finally set sail westward into the Irish Sea. Rumors began to circulate about the ship's destination, with some speculating it was headed for Australia. In addition to the unknown destination, it was discovered that there were leaking portholes on both F and G decks, with 2 wards already underwater, and a strong squally half-gale from the southwest. During the maiden voyage, there were rumors of the destination changing from Australia to the Mediterranean, which was confirmed when the medical staff saw the Britannic passing Cape Finisterre heading for Gibraltar on Christmas Eve. On Christmas Day, the ship was decorated with holly and mistletoe, and a Church of England service was held in the saloon. However, the rest of the day's activities aboard are unclear. The Bratanic made a brief stop at the Bay of Naples on December 28th to take on coal. 3 days later, on the afternoon of the 31st, the Bratanic entered the Day of Mudrose, anchoring inside the boom in 13 fathoms of water. The ship also gathered its first wounded patients, bringing them aboard and placing them in the overcrowded V wards and the not-so-full L and M wards. Medical staff and patients didn't have dinner until 11 p.m. that night when they were given chicken broth and cocoa. The sound of sirens and 8 bells on all vessels marked the start of a new year. The Bratanic returned to the United Kingdom on January 9th of 1916 and spent 4 weeks as a floating hospital ship off the coast of Isle of Wight. After returning to service in the early spring, she spent 3 extra months in military service and underwent refurbishment at the Harland and Wolff shipyard in June, with the British government paying a cash settlement of 75 British sterling pounds. The Bratanic continued in service until August 28th when it was requisitioned as a hospital ship once again. On September 4th, the Bratanic left Belfast for the very last time, and at this time tensions were high between Britain and Germany, and the ship eventually became a victim of a war crime, possibly due to the interference of the United States of America. During the First World War, the United States initially remained neutral, but there were rumors that the country was exporting munitions to England and France. To enable these exports, American President Woodrow Wilson organized a plan to supply munitions to England as British factories were running out of supplies. This involved shipping the supplies across the Atlantic Ocean using transatlantic liners, as it was not illegal according to the American neutrality laws. To expedite the delivery trips, the British government placed their imports with the Admiralty's Trade Division, which in turn placed the orders with the Oceanic Steam Navigation Company. The company agreed to use the largest transatlantic liners from the Cunard and White Star lines, including the Bratanic, to make the delivery trips faster. Now, based on this information, it is likely that the German intelligence service knew that the British intelligence might have had something to hide, possibly as early as the end of 1914, utilizing telegrams and code books. The German government and Navy believed that a ship, which was posing as an ocean liner, was transporting weapons to break the blockade Berlin had been tried to impose around Britain. Now, while we have no details on how the intelligence obtained a list for the Bratanic, it is possible that the Board of Trade inspected the ship before it departed from Liverpool. Such inspections would have been conducted to ensure that all cargo in the holds were listed on its shipping manifest and that the ship would not violate American neutrality laws by carrying arms. If the ship passed inspection, it would be granted a certificate of loading to verify its safety. However, there is no evidence of the surviving record of the Britannic's shipments. Nonetheless, however, German intelligence continued to investigate further. Shortly before the Bratanic was turned to a hospital ship, 3 spies were smuggled into the ship's pantry, and their presence raised suspicions due to a strange cargo held on board the RMS Lusitania, a Cunard liner. Before the Lusitania departed from New York in May of 1915, sympathetic crew members led to the discovery and arrest of the spies. They later perished in the sinking of the Lusitania after it was torpedoed by the U-boat U-20. Following this incident, it became evident that Germany was willing to target any ship without any mercy. Even the Bratanic became a target of suspicion. During one voyage, a patient by the name of Adalbert Franz Messini filed a complaint. Messini, who was on board the vessel, reported witnessing suspicious scenarios, including the transfer of 2,500 English soldiers wearing ordinary uniforms for active service instead of the ship's intended route from Mudros, Egypt. Majesty also mentioned handling of packages and rumored of shift changes in the opening and closing of watertight doors. Although the Bratanic never carried ammunition, German intelligence suspected the ship was transporting ammunition and troops who weren't sick or wounded. This suspicion was used as an excuse to tarnish the Britain's reputations. Despite Greece and Naples joining the war after, many hospital ships, including the Bratanic, were on high alert as they were easy targets for U-boats. On the 9th of September 1916, the HMHS Britannic was moved to an anchorage off Cowes, 5 days after arriving in Southampton. It remained there until the 24th when it embarked on its 4th voyage to Mudros from Southampton. However, on the 29th, it encountered a violent storm in Naples, causing it to rock from side to side among the waves. In her memoir about her time on the Britannic, Nurse Ada Garland described her reaction to the storm.
We were in a dense fog. The sirens which were booming away made my heart jump as I counted 1, 2, 3, but as it went on 4, 5, etc. I knew I shouldn't be tumbled in the water that night, but the thunder and lightning was terrific. I never beheld such lighting before. It lit up the whole sky in one beautiful, terrific glare. The boat rocked from side to side, and at times we were scarcely moving. The engines slowed down to just a creeping pace, but after a time I was rocked to sleep and knew no more until a stewardess came in at 7:30 a.m. to say we would be into Naples in half an hour.
Despite the storm, the vessel would continue its voyages. However, in October, the Britannic faced a quarantine in Mudros due to a foodborne illness that affected crew members before it could continue its way. By November, the HMHS Britannic was on its sixth voyage, having been called back into military service following discontinuation after the evacuation of Gallipoli. During the extended period between September and November, it was learned that a new offensive was taking place at Salonika, where an Allied army had been sent to block German supplies to Turkey, along with British offenses against the Turkish army in Palestine and Mesopotamia. Although smaller hospital ships were called up to serve in the Mediterranean, the Britannic was also called up under renewed pressure. After collecting the nurses, doctors, and crew members, the Britannic departed from Southampton on the 12th of November, making its way to Naples before reaching its arrival at Mudros. The Britannic wasn't supposed to travel on that fatal voyage. Instead, the Cunard liner and another hospital ship, the HMHS Aquitania, would have gone out to Mudros. However, the Aquitania was damaged in a storm in the English Channel, hence the sudden replacement. For this fatal voyage, the Britannic had 1,066 people on board, including over 60,000 voluntary aid department volunteer nurses. Some were aboard the Britannic for the first time, while others had been on board before. One of them was Ada Garland, who joined the Britannic in the late autumn of 1916. Ada went on to record her memories of the ship in a memoir describing what military hospital life was like in a Freemasonry without any mystery or secret. Ada joined the Britannic in Southampton in September of 1916, and in her memoirs she described the Britannic as
a beautiful picture, anchored with the evening sun glistening on the waters around, showing up her white paint and the deep green band around. Hundreds of little green electric lights lit up in 2 huge crosses on either side.
Another nurse who joined the Britannic was Sheila McBeth. Before joining the Britannic, McBeth had a dream of becoming a physical education teacher, but despite her parents' disapproval. She would join the Queen Alexandria's Imperial Military Nursing Service at the outbreak of the First World War. In her interviews she recorded with her grandson, McBeth recorded her thoughts, feelings, and what life was like on board a hospital ship like the Britannic.
When we went home after that first voyage, there was a most terrible storm. I was always on night duty, and I worked in 4 different wards on 3 different floors. The very big one at the top had the men who really weren't so fit, but the lower ones on F deck were below water level and double-decker bunk beds, one above the other. Well, we had such a terrible storm, we were battened down for 4.5 days, going through the Bay of Biscay and home to Southampton. Nobody could go on the deck. It was terribly stormy, and the ship was listing. And the sister who worked with me at night was so sick that she never did any work at all. She sat in the kitchen, in the bathroom, and was sick all night. I used to go into the bathroom and be sick for 5 minutes, and on the hour I would go round all the wards, and having some work to do, was not sick until I got Barton back to the bathroom. There was no work. But we had such a list on that the stair to the lowest ward was just a staircase, a little, I don't know what you call it, little loose steps with a handrail. And there was such a list, you very nearly had to walk down the back of it instead of the front. It was very difficult to get down to the ward, because the steps were, instead of being this way, were that way. Well, when we got back after that storm, there'd been damage to our ship, and matter of fact, we'd seen a floating mine in the English Channel as we went by, and they let us go home for a couple of days. And Mr. Abbott, next door to our house in Molding, took a photograph of me in my kilt, sitting on the steps with a stick, just going to go out to walk at Roldham. And in my scrapbook, you'll see that photograph, which Mother was very pleased to have, because if I'd been drowned, it was the last time she ever saw me.
Ada Garland would describe her block on board the ship.
In the block I was placed there were 6 wards. One had 244 beds, 108, 76, 38, 12, and the mental ward of 20 beds. Then there was the men's dining room for up to patients, which seated 10 men at once sitting, the dispensary, laboratory and operating theatre, the dental surgery and the barber's shop. Our quarters comprised of the dining room, which seated 250 at one sitting, lounge, music room, writing rooms, library, swimming bath. Our little cabins, which were fitted out for 2, were lovely, with bathroom and dressing room attached, all lit by electricity. I was fortunate the whole time to get a cabin on the outside with 2 portholes, but some of the girls were less fortunate in getting inside cabins, which were rather hot and stuffy, as they had to have the electric light on at all times and the electric fans to keep it cool.
As well as the nurses and doctors, the Britannic had 11 members of the 2nd Southampton Shirley Scouts, 673 crew members, and 315 Royal Medical Army Corps. One able seaman was Archie Jewell. Now, this wasn't the first time that Jewell had traveled on a White Star liner, for he, along with Nurse Violet Jessup and another able seaman, Arthur John Priest, previously traveled together on board the Britannic's sister ship, the Titanic. Jewell had been a lookout on board the Titanic and would have survived her sinking by climbing into lifeboat number 7, but however, the Titanic's sinking didn't scare away Jewell, for he returned to the sea after giving a testimony in the British inquiry. He would join the Britannic at Southampton during the ship's 6th voyage. Life on board the Britannic had followed a strict routine that crew members and the medical staff had to follow. The day began with breakfast that had been served at 8 a.m. At around 10 a.m. on the compass deck, which is located on the roof of the first-class lounge, the nurses were put through a physical drill, which was something new on this trip. The matron would run exercises for the nurses, including a Swedish drill. It's not known how the drill was run, but it's known that the matron would have this idea to give the nurses exercise to avoid laziness and piling on weight. Ada Garland wrote that she enjoyed it very much, and that made her feel better for the exercise. It's also noted that there were medical classes available for training the nurses in between shifts. For the rest of the day, lunch would have been served at 12:30 p.m. and afternoon tea or dinner would have been served at 4:30 p.m. Meals on board the Britannic weren't as glamorous as the lavish food that would have been served on board her elder sisters. This was wartime, and during the First World War, food was rationed. However, the Britannic would have served food that was similar to regular passenger transatlantic services. All the meals were equivalent to meals for third-class passengers. All the menus would have been done by a team of 12 cooks, led by Chef T. Hannon. Alongside Hannon were 5 assistant cooks, 1 vegetable cook, one vegetable assistant, a second cook, a second class cook, one entree cook, and a roast cook. During one voyage, the roast cook in Saunders was discharged, but it's not known why it happened. Although there are no further survival records of the rest of the menus on board, there's one surviving copy of a dinner menu from the Britannic dated on the 25th of September 1916. On the menu, patients, doctors, nurses, medical staff, and crew members would have been offered potage à la sauvage, or vegetable soup, pollock, ravigote, or sauce ravigote, which is a warm broth made from either meat, vegetables, or herbs, chicken lyonnaise, ribs, and sirloins of beef, maybe another saying of corned beef, with brown potatoes and cauliflower. There was also roast mutton in red currant jelly. There was also a buffet of ham, tongue, which is possibly ox tongue, amber pudding, friandises, which are pastry biscuits, and forgive me if I butcher that, biscuits, cheese, and coffee. Although there were cooks, it's possible that meat products were intended to cut back the portions of food that were rationed due to several shortages of supplies. It's also possible that some vegetables were homegrown, though there is little evidence to support this. After a lecture by Captain Rental and a church service in the patient's dining hall that occurs every night at 8:15, the nurses who were on the day shift would spend time having tea in their cabin before they went to bed at around 9 p.m. Those who were on the night shift would work until daylight. Although there were no patients on board that voyage, it is very likely that the same routine happens. The Britannic sailed across the Mediterranean Sea, reaching the Porto di Napoli in Naples on the morning of the 17th of November, and upon arriving at port, the crew witnessed a mist enveloping the port and Mount Vesuvius, the same volcano that erupted in 79 AD and wouldn't erupt until 1943, emitting smoke in the early morning. As the day progressed, the fog cleared and the sun shone brightly. Numerous small fishing boats were docked in the port, and all the young boys were spotted swimming and diving for money. Although the ship was a bit distant from the port, there was great excitement among the crew and the opportunity to come ashore. When the nurses left the Britannic, they were given a tour of the city of Naples for the day. Nurse Ada Garland documented the time she and the other nurses spent in Naples in her memoir.
The ship's motorboats took us to the quarry as we were anchored quite a way out. Our first harassment was finding a guide to take us to places of interest, but we eventually managed to secure two brothers who agreed to show us around and provide lunch for 8.5 shillings each. Away we went, quite a procession of us, around 50 to 60 nurses and the two padres, Church of England and Presbyterians. The principal streets and different places of interest were explained to us. For a good deal of the journey, we were followed by crowds of little rugged urchins begging for money. They would do somersaults and all sorts of tricks, which was all so very entertaining, but we dare not give them any coppers for fear of attracting a bigger crowd. I shall always remember the lunch. Although we were taken to the best restaurant in Naples, a gloriously decorated place, but the Marconi Italy is famous for was the limit, yard of it. The idea is to get one piece in your mouth and keep pushing it in with 2 forks. That's how the Italians eat it. The English have a style of their own. However, we had plenty of good things to make up for the Marconi strewn on the floor.
In the afternoon, Ada recalls she and the nurses went to the museums in Naples and traveled on one electric train to another part of the city where they saw local houses and gardens growing many figs, oranges, lemons, and tomatoes. They made a further visit to the St. Elmo prison, where Ada described it as
a very gloomy structure built in the year 1500. At the top of the prison, we could see scores of prisoners looking through the gratings. These men were mostly naval officers and men who had been traitors and defrauded the government.
The nurses had a tour of the St. Martino monastery run by the monks. Ada would describe the monastery in its beautiful form.
The walls of the monastery were made of marble and the floor mosaic. The ceilings were made of beautiful paintings, and each monk had his own specially carved chair of old oak.
The nurses and their guide made a last stop at the Church of St. Paul before they returned to the Bratanic. While the nurses were on their tour, the ship was being filled up with coal. However, this was a long process, and it wasn't until the following afternoon the Bratanic was filled with coal and that they were awaiting a violent storm. It's not understood when the storm started, but it kept the Bratanic in docks until it passed. Although the storm paused and restarted on the 19th of November, the Bratanic left the port, passing the Strait of Messina with no further problems. When she left Naples, no one could have guessed this would be the last time Bratanic would ever see land. Days later, steaming at full speed into the Kia Channel, the Bratanic would see her last sunrise before she met her maker by an encounter with a mine 250 feet below the water's surface. Next time we will look into the final moments of the HMHS Britannic and her story following the tragic events of the 21st of November 1916.